What's going on, everybody? This is the Salt City Hoops live postcast and beer. I'm your host, Russell Pereira. You can just call me Mark for short. I'm a Jazz fan. We just had a loss tonight to the Atlanta Hawks. I really thought we were going to get the win on that one. But hey, it's Friday night. We're here to have a beer or two. And because it's Friday night, we're probably going to have three. So I'm going to pour out this... let me... turn that off real quick, and we're going to pour out this Nitro Pumpkin Ale from Southern Tier Brewing Company. You probably know Southern Tier if you do like pumpkin beers. They have probably the gold standard of pumpkin beer, the Pumpkin Imperial Ale that they release every August or September or so. This is a coffee version of theirs, and I don't like their coffee Imperial Pumpkin Ale, but this is a Nitro beer, which means you can really pour this one out real heavy and get a real nice, good nitrous head on this one. And I find that the acidic coffee flavor goes a little bit better with a nitrous style ale than their regular imperial ale. So that clocks in at 8.6%. We're going to have fun today. You see that? Oh, look at that beautiful color. That's a heavy head that starts there, and then because it's nitrous, you can just do a hard pour, and that really becomes a nice silky flavor today. So, hey, you're here for a Hawks loss to the Hawks, and I have some real complaints tonight. Jazz in a good situation going in. We've won a few games straight, and I think we're looking at like what the theory of this team is. Walker Kessler playing many more minutes than Jared Vanderbilt. And we're seeing like, hey, Walker Kessler is the player of the future. Now, I think a lot of us rush into the idea of Walker Kessler being an every game, like 30, 35 minute a game guy. And we kind of lose sight of the fact that like he's a rookie and we're still going to kind of like slow play him a little bit, especially if there's a mistake here or there or whatever. But I do think it was interesting that you still end up with Walker Kessler only playing 18 minutes tonight. The shooting was poor from both teams. You end up with 27% from the Hawks. You end up with 29.5% from the Jazz. You expect a lot better from both sides. So if you're on your way home today and you're thinking, the Jazz just missed a bunch of shots, well, the Hawks missed a shitload of shots too. So you can't really chalk that up to shooting luck. And I was really frustrated with offensive rebounding today. And yes, the Jazz gave up a sick amount of offensive rebounds to the Hawks, but you still ended up with securing 13 offensive rebounds of your own. So the possession game didn't end up too bad. The shooting didn't end up too bad, where the Hawks shot 95 shots to Utah's 91. You had 23 free throws for Atlanta. You know, they have Trae Young. They shoot plenty of free throws to 18 free throws for the Jazz. So like the shooting and the possession battle wasn't that much different. You love to have fewer than 15 turnovers, but the Hawks had 9 of their own, and 6 turnovers can make the difference in a 7-point loss. But it feels like a winnable game against an Atlanta Hawks team that, like the Jazz, like the Hawks will finish today 27-26. They have a 14-15 record on the road. But for a team that has the momentum, they have the All-Star selection last night. You have players really at the peak of their game, especially guys like Kessler who are not seeming like they're hitting the rookie wall. You do expect that you would go into today being like, look, we're going to handle this team who's on a long road trip. Look, they kicked the shit out of a relatively healthy Phoenix Suns team the other night, 2 nights ago. If you were watching that on ESPN the other night, the Hawks beat the Suns by like 40 or some ridiculous shit. And yeah, the Suns were without Devin Booker, but you had Chris Paul, you had DeAndre Ayton, who have been battling injuries. You have Cam Johnson playing, who is coming back from an injury. So maybe the Suns just didn't have it either. But the Hawks are kind of on a tear. But you still think like, hey, we've watched the Jazz on their own road trips, right? Like you kind of try to like beat these teams on their road trips when they come into Utah, when they come in at altitude, and Utah's on a rest advantage over 2 days. And they just couldn't get it done. The energy was just weirdly bad. I got some shit to talk about Malik Beasley's energy, Kelly Olynyk's energy, It really frustrates me. But first, I got to take a drink of this beer because I have not had this beer yet. So, if this is your first time in, this is the Salt City Hoops live postcast and beer. The rules are you got to have a beer. No, I'm just kidding. That's just for me. But if you want to call in on the spaces, if you want to drop a comment on the live YouTube link, if you're seeing my ugly mug right now, it is a wide open radio show. Would love to have you give any thoughts you have about the Jazz. I'm here to have a beer with you and talk on a Friday night about what you're feeling about the Jazz. Trade deadline topics, totally open. I just wrote a column today that was published on Salt City Hoops about the likelihood of candidates playing who would get traded for the Jazz. I didn't expound upon players like in depth, like giving 500 words on every player. But if you're curious about why I think that Jordan Clarkson's unlikely to be traded, or why Mike Conley probably won't be traded, or why Ochai Agbaji is completely untouchable, I love talking about the trade deadline. I am guilty of the thing that Zach Lowe from ESPN derides, which is I love the transactional side of the NBA, and sometimes I lose sight of the actual basketball that happens, just because I love the idea of how do you create a basketball team and not piss off people. I think it's very easy to create a basketball team when you don't have to care about the people involved. So talking about the trade deadline, I love talking about that. But I'll always get going talking about the actual game we just had. So 8.6 beer tonight, 3% less than the beer I just had, which I'll talk about later as we get going. But cheers to you guys watching on YouTube. Cheers to you all listening on Twitter Spaces, and we'll get going talking about the specific things that piss me off tonight about Jazz Hawks. All right. Ooh. Man, I don't care if it's February. Pumpkin is a great flavor year-round. Pumpkin is actually a summer squash, believe it or not. I think it's kind of unfairly characterized as a winter vegetable. It's kind of a summer vegetable, right? And you can put it in some good things. So I do not mind this Coffee Nitro Imperial pumpkin stout from Southern Tier Brewing in New York. So the number one guy who's going to piss me off today is Kelly Olynyk. So Kelly Olynyk, he kind of has not the same value as Mike Conley at the trade deadline, but he has the same ethos that I think the Jazz are kind of looking for going forward, as far as like, okay, how are we going to trade him? Number one is he has another year left on his contract with some fair value to it. I think it's like 13 or 14 million, maybe a high 12 million. So he's not an easy contract to trade. And he has, like Mike Conley, extreme benefits to his game, especially to a contender. And there's also obvious negatives to his game. I think I've gotten pretty tired of the Kelly Olynyk rebound, which is he doesn't actually catch the basketball until it's directly under his chin. He catches the ball, and then he like immediately raises it above his head like, oh, I secured it at the high point, right? Kelly Olynyk does not high point rebounds anymore. I say these things in absolutes. Obviously, there are going to be exceptions to that, but Lauri Markkanen on his good rebounding nights, like he's high pointing the basketball. Like he's got a great vertical, he's got a great standing reach, and so he can really high point basketballs. And whenever the Jazz have a poor rebounding night, I never walk away from a poor rebounding night thinking Lauri Markkanen was the problem, right? Markkanen is frequently matched up against smaller players, and he murks them out of the play as far as boxing out is concerned. But Kelly Olynyk was getting beasted all game by just not just players overpowering him physically. He's just not identifying the players he's supposed to box out. And if he is identifying the players he is boxing out, he's losing those battles. And it's so frustrating to watch a guy who, you're going to look at this box score, you're saying like, hey, Mark, 6 points, 10 rebounds, 6 offensive rebounds. First of all, 4 of those offensive rebounds came on one possession, and he still didn't score. So let's calm down on that. And otherwise, a lot of rebounds are falling directly to him. And if you're looking at his season-long statistics, his defensive rebounding is complete garbage. His fouling is complete garbage. He committed 4 fouls in 30 minutes today. Frankly, I think he could have had more. He had a lot of off-ball fouls, or I can't say a lot, right? Like 4 fouls is what it is, 4 fouls. But he had 2 fouls off the ball. He had 1 very lazy reach-in foul that drew a bucket. And I would like to not cheer for Kelly Olynyk anymore, right? And I've always been more negative on the players whose defense relies on things like charges and kind of like pulling the chair out from under guys. I don't terribly appreciate the Kelly Olynyks of the world, right? And tonight was an interesting night just because we get to the point of Kessler only playing 18 minutes, right. And I think that's really interesting when you think about how the Jazz could have won this game. Look, the Hawks played Okongwu and Capella the entire game, right? Let me check the minutes here real quick. I think they spelled each other pretty well. 26 minutes for Capella and 22 minutes for Okongwu. And Okongwu has like tertiary 3-point range, like he's like Yusuf Nurkic or something like that, where you're like, okay, he can shoot the 3, but you're not exactly relying on him to shoot the 3. And only playing Kessler 18 minutes, I just can't get on board with that. I understand he's a minus 15 in 18 minutes. I understand that when he was on the floor, he was getting kind of fooled by the Trae Young pick and roll a little bit, but he played barely at all down the stretch, and especially in the fourth quarter. And the reason for that is because Will Hardy wanted to test the theory of the offense, right? Like, if I give Mike Conley and Jordan Clarkson the ball with a spread floor, I don't think they can cover it, right? The problem is you ended up, and we've seen this against Utah, right? Like with the Clippers and with the Mavericks, right? If you insist on having Capella or Okongwu on the floor, and you have 5 floor spacers on the floor, like we closed the game with Conley, Clarkson, Agbaji, who had a very nice game, Markin and Olynyk, then the whole point of that offense is drive into the interior of the paint because Trae Young can't do shit, and kick it out. And if they sell out to who you kick it out to, then you fly it around the horn. And you rely on your 40% three-point shooters in Olynyk, Marketing, Conley, Clarkson. Agbaji's had a nice season from 3. But that's just not how the offense actually worked for Utah. So if you're not going to run the offense like the typical playoff-style offense of like, we don't trust Trae Young to defend, we're going to drive into the teeth of the paint, and we're going to kick it out, and instead you're going to rely on very, very weird offense for Utah late. We had, your typical Jordan Clarkson possessions mixed in with kind of half-baked sets for Utah that didn't really go anywhere. Instead of, like, you're looking at the lineup being like, just drive into the teeth and kick. And that wasn't what they were doing for a majority in the fourth quarter. If that's going to be the case, put in the better player, right? Kelly Olynyk's screens are pretty good, but his defense is dump garbage. So if you're not relying on the whole driving kick appeal of Kelly Olynyk, and you want to have Ochai Agbaji out there for defense or Agbaji-ness, right? And if you want Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley out there because they've deserved it, then the player you're subbing Kessler in for is Olynyk. And Olynyk didn't have a shooting stroke tonight. But again, part of it's kind of the offensive, that one play kind of makes his shooting look a lot worse. I just don't see the theory of having Olynyk playing 30 minutes tonight against a team that we did not exploit what Olynyk could do offensively, and certainly didn't provide it defensively when we could have used some better stops. So Utah made a furious stop late in the fourth. I think that was commendable. That obviously happened with Olynyk on the floor. I think that was great. But I do think, Kessler didn't play for a majority of the third quarter. I don't even know if Kessler played the entire fourth quarter, now that I think about it. I got to go back and think about this a little bit more. Again, if you're listening or watching right now and you want to drop a comment or mention it, If you know if Kessler played in the fourth quarter, I'd love to hear it. Something Sharp actually asked, when I tuned in the third quarter, they were running Lowry, Olynyk, and Kessler. They've been doing that three big lineup a lot. That is actually a very recent thing. Kessler has firmly supplanted Jared Vanderbilt in the starting lineup. This is a recent thing we always thought that when Olynyk's had a few injuries this year, and so when Olynyk comes off the floor for injury or whatever, then from the very beginning of the season, Will Hardy has started Kessler alongside Malik Beasley. Malik Beasley taking that role of the Kelly Olynyk floor spacer, and end up with Markkanen and Kessler as your starting 4-5. There were two games about a month ago where Hardy started Vanderbilt and Kessler alongside Markkanen, which I thought was very curious because Beasley was healthy, but he had a nice little rotation going on towards the end where that made a little bit of sense. And I do like the idea of what Hardy was trying to do of hey, let's put defense out there alongside Conley Clarkson and Markkanen to try to make that defense work. But now that everyone's healthy for Utah, that is the starting lineup. Markkanen, Olynyk, and Kessler. And I think Markkanen has to get a ton of credit for surviving as a defensive three. And he defended everyone from DeAndre Hunter all the way up to Clint Capella tonight. So I think Markkanen deserves some credit there. So you end up with the with the situation where I just felt like Kessler could have played a few more minutes tonight, and it wasn't in place of Vanderbilt, right? Vanderbilt did not play a ton of minutes himself. Check out his minutes tonight. Yeah, Vanderbilt only 18 minutes himself. So we're playing 12 minutes with Kessler's 18 and Vanderbilt's 18. We're playing 12 minutes without either the two on the floor, and a lot of those came in the fourth quarter today. So, interesting situation indeed. We're playing the Hawks tonight, and Adam Andelin asked from YouTube, would Collins help the Jazz if we got him from the Hawks? Just don't think he is that great. I think this was a great case study on the whole situation with Collins. We have seen peak John Collins, right? And this can turn into a John Collins postcast if you want to. John Collins, he is 25 years old. He turns, when is his birthday? So he's going to turn 26 in September. So he's obviously a very young player. He's from Utah. I think a lot of Jazz fans know that. He played at Wake Forest for a couple years, and he was the 19th pick in the 2017 NBA draft. So Collins, I think, would be very interesting as a Jazz player. I think it's weird that he kind of occupies the exact same space as Lauri Markkanen, and you don't really want to. And like Markkanen, John Collins is still a kind of a dependent threat, right? So you still need to use your salary, use your assets, acquiring a guy who can dribble the basketball, I think, a little bit as you progress this team. Now, of course, the interesting thing with John Collins is that his salary is actually kind of okay, and acquiring good players is just simply that, acquiring good players. You can absolutely do that, and he's super struggled for the Hawks this year, but we've seen peak John Collins. John Collins is a very dynamic player who I think is being underutilized by this Hawks team, and I don't trust any team that is captained by Trae Young and is being coached by Nate McMillan. I think you're looking at a player with a lot of untapped potential who, in 40 games for Atlanta in 2019, averaged 22 points, 10 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks a game. If you made him a focal point of what the Jazz are trying to do alongside Lauri Markkanen, you might have a real player, but you still need. But the best part is you have Walker Kessler's still on the floor, right? So you can do this huge lineup that Markkanen is used to, and John Collins can play the 4, and John Collins hates playing center, and you can he's kind of like Anthony Davis, but only legitimately, right? Because John Collins, he's kind of a 4-size player, but you can have these weird, Collins at center bench lineups where you can be really effective, and Walker Kessler still plays 30 minutes a game. So it's really interesting, the idea of Collins on the Jazz, if you don't have to give up a lot of assets to do it. So I love that question because I do think John Collins is a good player, and there have been rumors that John Collins can be had for nothing, right? And if Atlanta's interested in like a Jared Vanderbilt, they're kind of at the tax line right now, so you kind of got to think about it like a John Collins for. The Vanderbilt and Beasley transaction works, but I do think that Utah is right to ask for another first-round pick in return for that, and Atlanta doesn't really have a whole lot of assets to go alongside of it. But you can work out a machination where John Collins ends up on the Jazz. I kind of do like that a lot for Utah, but I do think it gets a little tricky because I think Atlanta knows that Beasley and Vanderbilt for Collins is not quite equal value, but you can end up just trying to figure out how to figure out the asset play there. Sharp also asks on YouTube, is it just because we have a lack of threes on the roster? I really do think that Will Hardy likes to play his best players. And right now, the best players on the Jazz, you end up with the fivesome of Conley, Clarkson, Kessler, Markkanen, and Kelly Olynyk, right? And we did test the Vanderbilt with Kessler lineups, and Hardy really doesn't like to do that. So Markkanen playing the 3 in Cleveland last year, as you mentioned, Sharp, really did help Markkanen learn how to play that position, I think, and I think that was really helpful at learning how to guard some of those players. And I think more and more NBA teams these days are deploying threes that are just not dynamic. Right? And maybe you can't close a lineup with Markkanen playing the 3 alongside Olynyk and Kessler, to my point earlier of like why I thought Kessler should have played over Olynyk. But at the start of the game, like there's so many NBA teams that are just so willing to just have a 3-and-D guy like an Isaac Okoro or a Dorian Finney-Smith, where Lauri Markkanen doesn't have to be the most amazing defender at the small forward position to be effective on the court, right? And he also is if you put Lauri Markkanen at the 3, he's great at neutralizing what you're trying to do as an Isaac Okoro or a Dorian Finney-Smith. And I understand Finney-Smith, he's a 6'8", 6'9" guy, but Lauri Markkanen's 7 fucking feet tall, right? It's very reminiscent to the Orlando Magic title runs. Hedo Turkoglu, 6'11", small forward. Rashard Lewis, 6'10", power forward. Dwight Howard in the middle at center, right? Now, I'd love it if Walker Kessler was the next Dwight Howard, just as much as I would love Lauri Markkanen to be the next Rashard Lewis, right? And did Rashard Lewis ever make an All-Star game? I'm just thinking of that real quick. I love those Magic teams, man. I never liked Dwight Howard, but I love Jameer Nelson. I've always loved Hedo Turkoglu. I've always loved Mikhail Petrus. I'm totally butchering Petrus's name, the old French compadre of Rudy Gobert. Rashard Lewis made 2 All-Star games. One in his third to last season in Seattle. He averaged 20 and 5 for the Sonics, and then his second year in Orlando, he averaged 18 and 6 for the Orlando Magic. But he shot 2.8 threes per game on 40% shooting. So that's Rashard Lewis, his 2 All-Star games. That's definitely what you wanted to tune into. Like, Rashard Lewis is not a bad comp for like peak Lauri Markkanen, right? Like, Rashard Lewis really cratered towards the end. We think about Rashard Lewis with Washington and Miami just being a total useless player towards the end of his career, but like in his late 20s, man, that guy was a great player. So Lauri Markkanen, I think could could fit into that role of being a three-point shooter, playing the three, totally fine to do. Hedo Turkoglu obviously was, you play alongside him, that could be effective, but Kelly Olynyk is the furthest thing from a Hedo Turkoglu. Turkoglu at least had some interesting defense to him. Oh, this beer is actually quite refreshing. I love nitro beers. Just good to have. Doesn't make you too gassy. Just very smooth going down. So, what do we got going on? What else to talk about? Conley had his season high scoring tonight. He had 20 points. His foul drawing, I think, is really great going on these days. I think he's really trying to figure out how to bait guys into fouls. He had a very uncharacteristic 5 turnovers today. So if Conley ends up in more of a reasonable, acceptable amount of turnovers, that's one of those weird things that could end up in a win for Utah today. And yes, while you do you can't look at 3-point shooting luck as the reason you lose today, because both teams shot poorly from 3. You got to look at the guys who shot poorly from 3 versus the guys who shot poorly from 3 from Atlanta, right? So John Collins shoots 1 of 7 from 3. He's shooting 25% from 3 on the year. DeJounte Murray, who has never been a good 3-point shooter, he shoots 1 of 6 from 3 today. So if you take away the 2 of 13 for Atlanta, you end up with 8 of 24, 33% for Atlanta. And you look at Utah, the guys who are missing threes are guys who you expect to make threes, right? So Malik Beasley, 1 of 8. Lauri Markkanen, 3 of 11. Jordan Clarkson, 3 of 10. These are guys you expect to make more threes than they actually did. And so versus the 3-point shooters for Atlanta, you can point to it being a little bit unlucky for Utah as far as the guys who are shooting the ball for Utah. Sharp also has some nice drives in the paint that I saw from Conley. Conley's got great straight line speed. He's got great dribble moves. His dribble game has not lost a step, and he's got these great straight line acceleration. What Conley has struggled at, especially this year, but it started last year, is he doesn't have the upward oomph that he used to have, so his floater tends to require a little bit more arm than it usually has. So he's struggling with his floater range, and his left to right lateral defense is just non-existent like it might have used to be. He used to kind of get in there and squirrel in for steals, especially when he was with Memphis. He was considered a great defensive point guard for those reasons. I think he averaged over 2 steals a game at one point in Memphis, and he just doesn't have that guile anymore or the physicality to do that. But he's always had the acceleration. Mike Conley definitely gets guys on skates. Playing against Trae Young was a benefit for him today. He will absolutely abuse them very frequently, and so I have no problems with Conley's physicality on the offensive side of things. I do think he's doing I mentioned this last postcast. I think if he learns how to draw those fouls in more of that veteran style way would be really helpful. He's great at pump fakes now, and he's good at drawing contact. So I think if he's kind of learning how to draw contact without hurting himself, and that's something that he hasn't really done throughout his career, right? He's been a guy to avoid contact. And now he's sort of feeling okay, I can take a bump from a big guy and not kill myself. So I do think Conley had a really nice game today. The 5 turnovers notwithstanding, he was a -7 today. And because of his -7 and some of the issues that we had with Colin Sexton with his 20 minutes today, Colin Sexton, 12 points, 1 rebound, 0 assists, 3 turnovers, right? That's kind of why you put Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the game, is be Sexton, we need more of a complete package from what you're trying to do offensively, right? And in the first half, he was put in some difficult situations, Sexton was, and he ended up completing some difficult shots in possessions where he was expected to be the guy. But very early on in the second quarter, he just had total blinders on and committed a couple dumb turnovers. And so I don't agree with the move because I just don't think he's any good, but Will Hardy tried at the end of the game in the fourth quarter to give Nickeil Alexander-Walker some run for 5 minutes. And Alexander-Walker was a +4 in his 5 minutes despite him, right? He shot 0-2 from the field, 1 turnover and 1 foul. His 1 foul might have been a ticky-tack foul. He got 2 hands on the ball and on a big man, and they called it a foul. And I thought, that was kind of a ticky-tack. Maybe you can call that a steal. I would have much rather had a different player in. Malik Beasley only playing 18 minutes today because of his poor shooting and really atrocious defense. Malik Beasley could not rebound for anything. He was getting beasted on the rebounding all night. I would ascribe like half of the issues of the offensive rebounding to be Malik Beasley's fault. He wasn't marking his man, and when he was marking his man, he was just getting shoved out of position. Not illegally either, just he was going up against larger players, and I understand a smaller guy going up against a larger player can be problematic when it comes to rebounding. But Malik, while he has the height, he has none of the strength. And he gets just completely shoved out of position very frequently and very regularly as a rebounder. And that I didn't really clock it until this game that Beasley's rebounding is probably one of the more frustrating things about his game on a team that just does not have very good rebounding skill. And he's had a few good rebounding games, but he's frequently playing the 3 position, and he's ending up with 2 rebounds a game, three rebounds a game, and he's averaging 3.5. He has a few 5 and 6 rebound games in there, but I can look up quickly what the team stats are when he's on the floor for rebounding perspective. But you can't like target a guy for rebounding too much, but that can be a problem with him, and he was getting beasted tonight. I'm going to try to look up this real quick. What the team's rebounding statistics are when he is on the floor. While I'm doing that, I will welcome you. This is the Salt City Hoops live postcast. I'm Mark. I'm having a beer. This is an 8.6% Nitro Imperial Ale from Southern Tier Brewing Company in New York. It's got coffee. It's got pumpkin because it's February and we're celebrating Halloween. We're honestly just clearing out the fridge. All right, so lineups. So filter lineups, we're going to do on court. We're going to put Malik Beasley in here. So when Malik Beasley's on the floor, the Jazz give up 28.3% offensive rebound percentage, which would be 31st percentile in the NBA. So bad, but not terrible. So I can't really credit that all to him because Utah is a pretty atrocious defensive rebounding team as it is. However, the third most used lineup, which has Beasley and Olynyk on the floor together, this is real bad. When Beasley and Olynyk are on the floor together, I gotta look at this, man. Jesus Christ. When Malik Beasley and Kelly Olynyk share the floor together, which I would say are the Jazz's 2 worst rebounders for their position. You know, Conley for his size is actually pretty okay rebounder. Jordan Clarkson's kind of bad, but he's okay. Markkanen's good. Kessler's great. When Malik Beasley and Kelly Olynyk share the floor, the Jazz give up a 31.5% offensive rebounder rate, which if you extrapolated that to the entire NBA, which would by far be worse in the NBA. That is terrible. And the top 2 lineups where Beasley and Olynyk share the floor, Conley, Clarkson, Beasley, Markkanen, and Olynyk, and Sexton, Clarkson, Beasley, Markkanen, and Olynyk. 38.7% offensive rebounding and 37.1% offensive rebounding. And if you want to talk about, like, Mark, you're just throwing out shitty numbers at me. I don't know what the fuck that means. Just think about it conceptually. Like, 4 out of 10 shot attempts from the opponent just result in another fucking possession for the opponent, right? So, Really, really frustrating when Beasley and Olenek share the floor together, which happened for a few minutes tonight. I don't know exactly what the specific lineups were, but we definitely saw Beasley and Olenek playing together. Sharp and Andelin, thank you guys for hanging out on YouTube. We got the Twitter Spaces going as well. Thank you for Dan, Ben, Brant, and Shaw. Thank you for hanging out in Twitter Spaces. Andelin says the Hawks are number 1 in defending the three, so kind of a tough night from three. I didn't know about the Hawks being number 1 from three. That is actually an interesting stat to know. And Adam, if you know, is that defending the 3-point as a percentage or how many threes they give up? Because if you look at the Jazz shot chart tonight, the Jazz got up a ton of threes tonight. The Jazz got up 44 threes, which is a very healthy amount for them, and from all over the court. And if I'm recalling correctly, they had a lot of good open threes tonight. And I will always credit it. To your point, if it's about percentage, yeah, percentage can be kind of a fluky stat, but I always say, if you're top 4 or bottom 4 in a percentage for 3-point shooting, that means you're forcing the threes to the right players night in, night out. Eventually you end up with a sample size where the 3-point percent shooting matters. I forget who the statistician is that I really respect, but it takes a long time for certain statistics in the NBA to become statistically significant. And if you'll excuse me for a moment, I have a graduate degree in econometrics, so I care about stats a lot. And the idea of something being statistically significant really matters. And I think he pointed out something where your offensive rating and your defensive rating, that shit matters from game number 9, right? As long as you keep the same personnel largely, that stuff matters really early. And 3-point shooting is generally not going to be significant until game 100. It's just something that can be very, very fluky night in and night out. But I do think that as you watch how teams defend the three, that especially Milwaukee, they're playing a lot differently this year. But in prior years, Milwaukee has made sure to say, look, we're okay giving offenses who frequently will park their Jared Vanderbilts in the corner. We're okay giving those guys 3-point shots. And guys like Giannis and Brook Lopez and Wesley Matthews and all those guys they are so well coached to say, we will very much cover the corner 3 if you have a guy worth respecting out there. But if it's a guy like Jared Vanderbilt who's out there in the corner, we're just going to instead have Giannis and Brook Lopez guarding the paint, and good luck. Good luck playing 4-on-5 against us, right? It's kind of like the evolution of the Andrew Bogut guarding Tony Allen in the playoffs, right? Where if you're going to put a corner shooter out there, we just don't care. And so the Bucks were very high at giving up quantities of corner 3-point shots, and they still allowed a very poor percentage, right? So I care more about the quantity of shots. And Sharp mentions on YouTube, he's on the broadcast they said the Hawks' opponent 3-point percentage shooting was low, which seems fraudulent. You don't look at the Hawks and think they're loaded with great perimeter defenders. I think that's absolutely true. I think DeAndre Hunter is, he's above average, but he's kind of living on reputation at this point. John Collins is a bad perimeter defender. Trae Young is a bad perimeter defender. DeJounte Murray is good, but if you're watching the game tonight, you're not watching DeJounte Murray, stopping 3-point shots from happening. So I gotta look up what would this be, an NBA team stat? What is the quickest way to look at this? This is what I gotta get better at. If anyone knows on the broadcast from YouTube or Twitter, what is the best way to look up stats? Because frequently I use so many different sources for this. Stats by teams. See all stats. When I look up stats is when I should be taking sips of beer. I hope you're enjoying a beer with me on this Friday night. If you're having a beverage, let me know what you're drinking. would love to know what beers or cocktails you're checking out. While we check out team 3-point shooting defense. General, let's go to we're looking at defense dashboard. I think is our opponent shooting. That's what we want. NBA.com is pretty good with this. So, where is 3-point shooting? Atlanta Hawks allowing 35.4% from 20 feet and above, but that also doesn't include. That can include some 2-point makes. How come I can't sort this by type of shot? 3-point field goals, 3-point percentage. There we go. The Atlanta Hawks, after tonight, are 34.8% allowing 3-point shots. That is fourth, quote unquote, best in the NBA. And the Jazz, they're very middle of the pack. They're a little bit above middle of the pack at 36.1%. So I want to reiterate that, like, as Sharp intimated on YouTube, that 3-point shot percentage is largely luck based. So you have to look at over the course of a 20-game sample or a 40-game sample or the entire season, you're going to look at these performances and say, like, are the Jazz a bad team defending the 3-point shot? And I think the more accurate stat is how many threes are you giving up? And then Jazz largely are really good at defend. They're basically a Quinn Snyder team, right? They're very similarly coached. They gave up a shitload of mid-range shots today. The Hawks made a bunch of mid-range shots today. I got to get better at the YouTube display to show, like, the shot chart I'm looking at. But if you're on your phone right now and you want to check out I would say the best way to look at the shot chart is go to NBA.com or your NBA app or the ESPN.com or the ESPN app and take a look at the shot chart between the Hawks and the Jazz. The Jazz, they shoot only interior shots and 3-point shots, right? There's the occasional mid-range, of course. And I do think that having Lowry Marketing kind of unlocks a lot of the offense for the Jazz. In the mid-range, by the way. But if you look at the Hawks offense, like, they didn't have a whole lot of those dead space two-pointers, but they did have a ton of floaters, a ton of free throw line jumpers. And I'm okay with giving up those kinds of shots, and especially with the Jazz personnel. Annoyingly so, Walker Kessler can turn into, like, the new Rudy Gobert, where it's like, you're going to defend the paint really well, you're going to defend the three really well, but does Walker Kessler and your entire defensive scheme, are they able to defend the mid-range well enough? Well, we're going to see. So when it comes to shooting the three and defending the three, yeah, like, the Jazz did not shoot well from three today, but I'm going to point to the players who shot the three versus the players who shot the three for the Hawks. DeJounte Murray, 1 of 6 from 3 today. John Collins, 1 of 7 from 3 today. Bogdanovich, 2 of 6 from 3 today. You expect Bogdanovich to shoot a little better, but 1 of 7 from 3 from Collins is not out of range. 1 of 6 from 3 from DeJounte Murray is not out of range. And you match it up to the guys who are missing threes for Utah. Malik Beasley, 1 of 8. Lowry Marketing, 3 of 11. Right? Like, those are players you expect to shoot better from 3 than they actually did. You want your volume shooters, and I forgot Jordan Clarkson, 3 of 10, but 3 of 10 versus 4 of 10, that's kind of splitting the difference there. Trae Young was 2 of 8 today, if I'm going to be fair about everything. So 27% versus 30% between the two teams. It's not really a luck-based thing. It really just does come down to some of the transition buckets that happened today off of turnovers. You had 6 more turnovers for the Jazz than they had for the Hawks. And that's going to be a little frustrating. I haven't checked points in the paint today. 56 versus 46, not too bad from that perspective. Largest lead for Atlanta was 22 today. I do got to give Utah a lot of credit. They do not give up. This is a fun team to watch. As with the shooting that they have, the effort that they have, I really do appreciate knowing that if they get down by 20 points, anytime before halfway through the fourth quarter, it's a team worth watching, right? I think this narrative has died on the vine a little bit as the Jazz veer towards a 500 basketball team. But very early on in the season, we had so many wins that the Jazz pulled out that we very loudly exclaimed on Twitter and elsewhere that last year's Jazz team would not have won that game. Oh, last year's Jazz team, they didn't have the heart. They didn't have what it took to come back from 15 down, or more apt, like we saw plenty of games where the Jazz were up by 15, 20 points, and they would lose the lead, right? And they would lose the game accordingly. And this Jazz team, they fight back on those things. Like they really do a great job at not giving up when they're down by several dozen points, or if they're leading and they blow a lead, they kind of do buckle in and play a little bit better as the game goes on. At least that's how it feels, even if it's not necessarily true or not. Steven says he's drinking a Three Philosophers. That's a classic Ommegang beer from up the river in New York near Cooperstown, so I love hearing that beer on the broadcast. And Sharp says, that was my first favorite beer when I started drinking craft beer, and still one of my favorites. Three Philosophers is a classic. I should bring that on the broadcast pretty soon. Let me show you guys what I was drinking earlier. I was drinking a Jessup Farms. Jessup Farms is a more of a natural brewery here in Colorado. This beer is called Legal in Europe. It's a bourbon barrel-aged imperial stout with chocolate and cinnamon and series. And chilies. I'm sorry. This is a 11.1% beer. This was bottled on October 27th. This was great. This is what has me in a great mood tonight. Talk about the Jazz and the loss against the Hawks. I will also talk about the trade deadline too. So, Steven says, where did Trae Young play? Trae Young's dad played. I didn't know that Trae Young came from a basketball family. Trae Young's dad is Rayford Young from Lubbock, Texas. That's right, Steven. You are from the Dallas area, right? Lubbock's near Dallas, right? If I got my geography right. Oh wow, that is super not correct. So I apologize for insulting your Lubbock native. Lubbock, for those of you who are not familiar either, that is that looks about 2 hours south of Amarillo, which is on the New Mexico border there. So you're in the western side of Texas, Lubbock, Texas, and there's a university there, right? Like what university is out there in Lubbock, Texas these days? That's right, Texas Tech, right? Texas Tech, what a good school. That's fun there. Did Trae Young's dad play at Texas Tech? I didn't know that. I thought Trae Young was just a guy. Now Trae Young went to Oklahoma, of course. So, good beer we got going to this Jessup Farm chocolate chili bourbon barrel aged beer is really good. What else can we talk about today? I haven't done the player by player rundown as I would, but we've been on the air for a little while now. I think I will I'd give a quick player by player rundown. I've already described my frustration with Kelly Olynyk today. His stat line looks okay with 6 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists. 4 offensive rebounds, and 3 of those offensive rebounds came on like the same possession where he still missed the bucket. Had a couple good passes, and frankly, I don't think his rebounding really mattered because the 10 defensive rebounds looks really good for Kelly Olynyk. But he was a weak player on the glass when he was on the floor, and I just, it's really frustrating to watch some of his turnovers. He had 2 turnovers in 30 minutes today, and it just really... this was a frustrating Kelly Olynyk game. Let me just settle at that. Lauri Markkanen's a funny player because he plays these great games and we just don't talk about him. Lauri Markkanen played a great game today. Very pleased with him. He struggled with shooting in the first half, but he still finishes 8 of 19 from the field and 6 of 7 from the free throw line. He draws fouls. He shoots 3 of 11 from 3. And he's a 40% three-point shooter. If he shoots a couple more threes, this is a stellar game. But we're still looking at 25 and 10 for Lauri Markkanen. Again, the 1 assist, 0 turnover game from him is very emblematic of how Utah is deploying him as a basketball player. I'm really looking forward to how the young Markkanen evolves his game going forward. All-star selection Markkanen, by the way. I have not mentioned that. Walker Kessler, only 18 minutes today. Coaching decision. He had some weird foul trouble early, but he finishes the game with 3 fouls, minus 15 in his 18 minutes. I do think he was getting exposed early, but I do think it was kind of a mistake not to let him play through it. Like, I'd rather lose by 25 and give Kessler the experience against a Trae Young, Clint Capella, Onyeka Okongwu pick and roll than just give him 18 minutes and say, like, you fucked up, I really don't trust it. But, more importantly, they were trying to experiment with on the offensive side. So Atlanta was always playing with Capella or Okongwu on the floor, and Utah really tried to experiment with a true 5-out lineup in the fourth quarter. So we had 12 minutes played without without Walker Kessler. I'm confusing Walker Kessler with Rudy Gobert already. Utah had 12 minutes. Almost all of them were in the second half. Played without Walker Kessler or Jared Vanderbilt on the floor. So you're really testing Atlanta's defense, led by Trae Young, who is the world's worst defender. They're trying to stress test those centers of Capella and Okongwu against a true 5-out lineup. Not a fake 5-out lineup with Jared Vanderbilt standing in the corner, who went 0 of 1 from 3 today. A true 5-out lineup, but I don't think that Utah's offense was set up at all to exploit that. And so I had a problem with Walker Kessler really only getting those 18 minutes today if Utah's offense was not going to actually exploit the defense the way they intended. Conley, loved watching him play today. It was a really fun game from him. 7 of 9 from the field, 8 assists, 5 turnovers. The 5 turnovers, very rare from Conley. I thought a couple of them were some dumb passes, but I don't look at Conley's dumb passes and be like, what was that guy thinking, right? Like, Conley's ideas are always good. He doesn't dribble the ball off his feet, rarely ever. Jordan Clarkson was the reason the team kind of got back into it at the end of the second quarter. He went full iso ball and had bucket after bucket after bucket at the end of the second quarter to bring the game back within 14 points when it was a 22-point lead for Atlanta. He finishes 10 of 21, 3 of 10 from 3, 1 of 3 from the free throw line. Man, if we want to poke at some things, man, Mike Conley 4 of 6, Jordan Clarkson 1 of 3, Lauri Markkanen 6 of 7. It's not like bad free throw shooters were missing free throws tonight, guys. Like, those are guys you would expect to, like, this could have been a 100% free throw shooting night. Clarkson with 5 rebounds, 3 assists, plus minus of 0. Rudy Gay was adequate. Malik Beasley's probably the biggest target of, like, why the bench really didn't click today. 18 minutes today. He gets up 8 threes in 18 minutes. That's classic Malik Beasley and why I think he is a great, valuable contributor for a contender. But he shoots 1 of 8 from 3 today, minus 10 on the night. Ochai Agbaji was a great contributor today. His 24 minutes, he was effective on defense. 3 of 5 from 3 today. He was fast. He was physical. He had a great dunk on the fast break today where he was sprinting down the court past everybody else. He didn't really demonstrate a whole lot of dynamicism, if that's a word, for Ochai Agbaji, but he's clearly, like, belongs on an NBA court. Like, that's the cool thing is, like, you watch a guy like Isaac Okoro for Cleveland, and you're not really sure if Okoro, like, belongs on an NBA court, especially in a starting lineup. Like, there is a theory that the whole point of Ochai Agbaji going forward is, can that guy be a low-usage 3-and-D guy? And the past month has proven unequivocally yes. I want to see what he can do with a strong first dribble and make that first pass. But if that guy's going to be a 40% three-point shooter, I love it. He's built, he's physical, he's quick, he's very twitchy left to right. He fouls a lot, but I don't know, man. The small forward who fouls a lot, I'm not exactly going to... A rookie, I'm not going to exactly chalk that up as a problem. So I was very vocally sour on Agbaji in the first 3 months of the season, because if you're going to play that poorly in the G League, like, something is wrong. But it's like he's taken that responsibility in the G League of being a focal point of the offense, a focal point of the defense, and said, like, all I have to do in the NBA is do what I'm good at. And he's really excelled at that over the past month. So I really appreciated that. So that's the player-by-player lineup. We've been on the air for quite a while now. Love taking the comments from YouTube. Sharp, Andelin, and Steven, love having you guys comment in the YouTube. Dan, Ben, Brant, and Shaw, if you guys want to ask a question, or anybody on YouTube, I'm going to take a couple sips of beer here as I kind of scan the box scores of the other games here. Check out my fantasy basketball lineup against. I'm going for a 9-0 victory, Ben. By the way, this week I'm trying to see if I can win threes this week. The 9-0 victory in fantasy basketball is very rare. I'm trying to go for it, Ben. We're going to scan here. If anyone wants to drop a comment or request to speak on Spaces, I will absolutely take your comments or questions. Other than that, I'm going to drink this beer and scan the league a little bit. This is a great choice to have this pumpkin beer in February. I feel like it's... I hate winter. So I'm not a warm weather guy. I'm from Buffalo, New York. If you're on YouTube, you're looking at my background being like, you're from Buffalo. How do you hate winter? Man, Buffalo doesn't have winter sports, man. I just grew up just like hating winter, and it's funny, like, having these pumpkin beers makes you feel good about winter a little bit, because it tastes more like crisp fall. So Sharp asked, do I have any Sixers on my fantasy team? So I got a few fantasy teams going. The one with Ben here is a 16-team dynasty league where we keep up to 6 keepers. I have no Sixers on this. I don't think I've ever had a keeper Sixer on this fantasy team, because I do think... Did I have Maxey at one point? Maybe? But like, if I had Maxey, it would have been when he was a rookie. So I don't think I have any Sixers, of course. George Niang, big fan of Niang, to bring him in a 16-teamer. You can absolutely bring in Niang as a 3-point gunner to contribute. I do have Jonathan Isaac as a player. He's not a Sixer, of course, but I in a 16-teamer, I'm trying to see if Jonathan Isaac is worth having in a 16-teamer. And of course, he gets a steal every single fucking game. So Jonathan Isaac, he's worth keeping around. He was 4 or 5 from the field today, 9 points, 3 rebounds, 1 steal, and how many minutes today? Again, 10 minutes. This guy's putting up 9 points, 3 rebounds, 1 steal. Sharp says, we love the minivan up here. I got Jazz fans in the chat, Sharp. On Twitter, we love George Niang, and I do think the Jazz. You look at all the Jazz players who are no longer on NBA rosters. Hassan Whiteside, Jared Butler. Jared Butler, I think, is on a 2-way or something, or I think he actually might have been cut from that. Mie Oni. Who are the other like late second rounders that the Jazz have had? You know, Hassan Whiteside's not on an NBA roster. Sharp with Daniel House. I really thought that House would be a contributor for the Sixers for sure. He was a major contributor for the Jazz towards the end of last season. And Niang was the guy that I thought, like, I don't see how this guy sees the floor for another team. And of course, he goes to the Sixers, and like, he is valuable. He is valuable for what they're trying to do there. And love his personality. We really saw what the fabric of the Jazz was made out of when Niang and Ingles were not on the team, right? And it's just the team just barely just trying to fight each other towards a championship. So we love the minivan. We love George Niang. Hilarious dude. Iowa State guy. We replaced George Niang with Taylor Horton Tucker. That's going great. So I got no Sixers on this dynasty team. I do have a 30-team dynasty league that I'm in. I don't think I have any Sixers in this one either. But sometimes I have some end-of-bench guys that I don't totally remember. Yeah, no Sixers on my 30-teamer either. So those are the two leagues I care most about right now. I'm in a home league that I have Durant, Booker, and Steph. I made some trades, which is why I have Durant and Steph Curry on the same team. Of course, they've both been out for a very long time, and Devin Booker. So I've made a bunch of trades, and I'm in my home league. I'm completely out of it, which is really unfortunate because I really thought I had it made trading for Durant, Curry, and Devin Booker, who are all like first to second round graded players. And I thought like, I'll just turn the back end of my roster and just try to make it worth it. And they all got hurt at the same time. And I had a bunch of 2-7 weeks, which punted me out of that one. Sharp says, whenever we're giving up a 10-0 run and we're about to choke a game in the third quarter, Niang hits 2 threes in a row. Man, Jazz fans are used to that. Jazz fans are used to Niang saving our ass quite a bit around these parts. So, and R. Valens, too, says, what's your take on John Collins? You want him on the Jazz? I touched upon this earlier. I'll touch upon it one more time. I would love John Collins on the Jazz if the asking price is really as low as it seems. I would not give up a premium asset for John Collins. I think that John Collins is a better basketball player than Malik Beasley, but compared to what you could get on the market for their contract value, Malik Beasley would easily net a first-round pick and a fringe young player, whereas John Collins might get you a barely useful player for Atlanta's team right now because his contract is quite expensive and goes out for a few years. But I do think the Jazz are in the unique position of affording John Collins' contract over the next few years. And while I do think that Collins and marketing kind of occupy the same role on a team as a finishing level player who just does not, you don't start possessions with them having the basketball, I do think that there is, if you're going to make an asset play, you can do a whole lot worse than saying, hey, John Collins, how would you like a lot more usage on the first team in your entire NBA career that's not fucking dysfunctional, right? I do think that putting John Collins on a non-dysfunctional team actually matters for the Jazz. Look, if he can be had for a song, then I would make the play. His salary does not mean a lot for the Jazz, as opposed to some other teams where they're looking at luxury tax payments or they're going to be at the cap or whatever. Collins' contract is expensive, and if we can have him for a song, I would totally do it. So, appreciate the comments on YouTube from Sharp, Steven, Andlin, R. Valens. If you're still around asking about John Collins, if you want comments about John Collins, I'll take all your John Collins comments. We've had a lot of folks here in the Twitter spaces. Love having you listening to my voice. If you want to see my face, I'm here on YouTube talking about this night on Friday night. What do you guys think? Should I stick around? I'm happy to stick around. I just need to take a piss break. R. Valens says, what do you consider a song for John Collins? It's Salary Dump. It was rumored, Valens, that that Collins could actually be had for garbage. And I know that Nate Duncan's mock trade deadline can kind of be not quite in line with valuation for real players, but he was had for Jalen Smith, Goga Batadze, and Terry Taylor. And if you're thinking to yourself, I don't know who Terry Taylor is, I think I know who Goga Batadze is, and I've heard of Jalen Smith, then yeah, you wouldn't be mistaken. Like, those are three non-entity players for the Pacers. Now, obviously, Jalen Smith, he started out his NBA career coming out of Maryland, lottery pick for the Phoenix Suns, was supposed to be like this switchy 4-5 kind of guy with a good three-point shooting stroke, and he actually got his third-year option declined. Indiana picks him up, and he immediately becomes like a useful player. Or actually, I think it was like in the year that his option was declined for Phoenix, he became a useful player, and then Indiana picked him up, and he's been useful since. But he's been in and out of the lineup for Indiana for injuries, for usefulness reasons. And then Terry Taylor, I know you have never heard of him, maybe. And Goga Batadze was, I don't think he was a lottery pick, but he was a first-round pick by Indiana. I thought he would be a very useful, like, burly stretch center type. And Sharp says, like, that was more because everyone wanted Collins on the Pacers, which, yeah, Collins on the Pacers makes sense, but Kevin Pelton had mentioned to me that there's a reason that everyone kind of let that transaction happen, which is that the news was out there that Atlanta, it might be possible that his only value was a salary dump. So when it comes to it being a song, I super don't think that Atlanta would accept a value that low for John Collins, and that would be like not just a song, but like a hymn. I don't know. What a ditty? What is less than a song? I do think Atlanta has a new general management group led by Landry Fields, right? And so I don't think they can take the loss on a transaction like that so early in their tenure and say like, oh, we lost John Collins for nothing. I think they would actually try to get John Collins to have some asset coming back, but Atlanta has financial constraints, right? So I don't think it takes a first round pick to acquire John Collins. I do think that Atlanta is in a situation with John Collins very similar to Utah with Mike Conley, where the asking price is a first round pick, but the market says I just don't really want a first round pick for him. But it is always interesting to check in on the Atlanta Hawks and how they play a basketball game, and especially tonight where John Collins was a negative part of the offense. There was no part of Atlanta's offense today that said, John Collins, this is a play for him. He is a dynamic forward position. We're going to have this going. He just stood in the corner, and he shot 1 of 7 from 3 today. And they were way off, too. They weren't accurate three-point shots. So, Sharp says, other than Conley, who is old, your other guards are more score-first types, right? I think that my space is cut out. Sorry, guys, if my space is cut out. We're back. My spaces 2 nights ago completely emptied. And Valen says, if you need to go to the bathroom, we can wait. I think I might take you up on that offer. I think I will take a quick 2-minute bathroom break. And you know what? I don't have a game until Monday. This is my night. So the Jazz play the Mavericks on Monday. We might get Luka back. Dan, Branton, Shaw, if you're in the Twitter Spaces, I'm going to take a quick 60-second bathroom break because I have had a lot of beer so far. And I'm going to continue having some beer. Sharp and Valens, if you want to stay on the line, I'm going to talk about Jazz trade deadline all you want. This is exactly the break I needed. And Dan, are you coming in to sub for me? Is that what did I decline your request on accident?
No, I'm here.
Well, I hope I hope
I
you're.
figured I would.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. Sorry. Well, I just figured I'd let you pee, and if I jumped in and talked for a minute, I figured you'd go pee, and everybody would be happier.
Well, I'm so happy you offered to say that, because we got folks in YouTube who are like, oh man, go take a piss, please do so. And I've had a lot of beers tonight, and I got a lot of shit to talk about the Jazz, and we're going strong tonight. We're doing great. I'm having a lot of fun. So Dan Clayton, managing editor for Salt City Hoops. Dan, I'll leave you with a question from Sharp on YouTube, who says, other than Conley, who is old, your other guards are more score-first types, right? And Sharp is a Sixers fan, by the way. Would you be worried about Collins not being as good without a great passing point guard?
Yeah, so actually, precisely the reason I asked Mark to speak, and so I could kind of sub for him here for a minute while he goes and takes care of some biological needs, is because I feel like... So I might have an insight or two to share about the Collins desire. I do think that's a fair question, though, Sharp. Like, John Collins is but here's the thing about it. Here's the caveat. I don't know how much he's benefiting today from playing with 10 assists per game, Trae Young. Just because, as Mark said, they kind of don't have him fully unleashed in their offense anyway. He's sort of just the pressure release. He's sort of like what Lauri Markkanen did with what Cleveland did with Lauri Markkanen when they got him. And, that's an important role, but I think if the Jazz do go after him, it's because they see a fit there that might be something where they would unleash him in a way that he's more than just, the guy at the receiving end of the helper pass. What I wanted to chime in on, and literally, seriously, mostly I was just trying to give Mark an opening. But what I wanted to chime in on is as he was conversing about what Collins' value is, what his trade value is, what the asking price is. So here's my read on the situation. Here's my guess about what the situation is. I think that the Hawks started out asking for a first-round pick. I think they would like to get a first-round pick because everybody would like to get a first-round pick for a guy that they drafted high and developed and turned into a starting caliber player. I think that the way that the Jazz are approaching this is that Collins' contract is far enough ahead of his production that I think they kind of wanted some compensation for taking John Collins. And that doesn't mean that they don't view him as a good asset. I think that from what I can gather, I think they like how he fits with Markkanen. I think that they can imagine a future where Markkanen, Collins, and Kessler are playing together in the front court. They also can imagine, minutes where it's Collins and Markkanen, or Collins and Kessler, or Kessler and Markkanen. So it just gives them a lot of optionality, and they like that. But because of that contract that's, 24, 25, 26 million, I think the Jazz were trying to see if there was a way they could get something. But ultimately, and this is why I sort of feel like that's a deal where if it gets to, 2:59 Eastern time on Thursday and nothing else has happened, I still feel like this is a deal that the parties could come back to pretty quickly, because I feel like the players that Atlanta was most interested in those discussions are players that the Jazz don't necessarily consider core to their future anyway, which is why I think if there's a way at 2:59 to get it done just without picks, it wouldn't shock me. But again, a lot of this is just guesswork here. Sounds like you're back from peeing, Mark, so I'll shut up.
Dan, how are you doing?
Hey, thanks for the shout out at the start, by the way. Yeah, my kid went to sleep. Everything's under control at the Clayton house. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no, that's Dan and I are in similar situations where I got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I think Dan and I share like a handshake about, oh, you have spirited 3-year-olds. What's that? What is that like, right? And I always laugh.
Spirited is a pretty big euphemism, but go ahead.
It's I never really knew what a spirited child was like, and then Dan, you just have the one. I had my second child a year and a half ago, and I was like, oh, this is what a normal baby is like. So I've had our second kid. His name is John Tully. So we have two kids named after jazz players. He goes by JT, but. But we were like, oh, this is what a non-spirited child is like. So thank you for fielding the John Collins questions, though. I heard the tail end when you were mentioning what the deal could come back to towards the end. Is that because, like, if Beasley and Vanderbilt don't get traded, that, like, you can come to each other and be like, hey, man, if you want Beasley and Vanderbilt, they're yours for Collins? Is that what you were mentioning?
Yeah, I just think that those, like, I get that those players are kind of a paradox because they're young enough that they could be part of, what the Jazz do moving forward. But because their contracts are shorter, because, I think they're role players, in the construct of a team that's competing for stuff anyway. And the Jazz know they're a couple of years away from that. And so, you generally aren't, like, keeping your seventh and eighth man through, like, a lengthy rebuild. You know what I mean? Like, those are positions you can kind of replace later. I get that, like, every contender needs utility, dirty work guys like JV. Every contender needs a guy who can come off the bench and get hot in a hurry. Like, I'm not saying that they're just expendable or replaceable. I'm just saying that I don't get the sense that they are a big part of the future plan. And so if you can get a guy like Collins without giving up someone who you feel like is part of the plan, then, like, at the end of the day, why wouldn't you? And so maybe the Jazz relent and just decide that, the contract being as high as it is what it is. And it's not going to feel as high in a couple of years when the cap rises. The Hawks, I think, will relent, or maybe have relented, because there are already reports out there that they're no longer demanding a pick. So it's one of those deals where I feel like there's a pretty obvious middle ground to be had as Thursday afternoon approaches. And that doesn't mean it'll get done, because the Jazz could get a different offer where they can get something different for Beasley or something different for Vando, and maybe they do that instead. But if all those pieces are still sitting there, as the clock ticks on Thursday afternoon, like, I just, it feels like a deal where they could find some middle ground pretty easily.
Yeah, let me be very clear about something. I think a lot of Jazz fans are misconstruing a John Collins trade as a win-now trade. Any trade the Utah Jazz make in the year 2023 of our Lord is a win-future trade. Yes, trading for a positive player makes the team more likely to be a 7 seed or what the fuck ever. But any trade the Jazz make right now is about the year 2025. It's about the year 2026. It is not about, like, making the first round and being a tough out in the first round and, like, making the conference semifinals. This team has a rich owner. They are not trying to just salvage ticket money to make the conference finals, right? It's always about looking forward. The point about acquiring a player like John Collins is not about his quality of a player to win right now, but the fact that he's under contract for this year and 3 years further down the road. He has 2 years left on his deal of $25 million and $26.5 million, and then he has a player option for the 2025 season of $26.5 million, which at his age and quality, unless he completely falls off a cliff, which would be a different issue, he would opt out of that player option. So you're getting John Collins for 2.5 years, and he would enter free agency at, I don't have his contract pulled up, but would it be about the same time as Lauri Markkanen, right? The same offseason, which allows you to, before I go on a super soliloquy about that, let me just confirm that. 24, 25. No, it would be yes. So Lauri Markkanen has he has a non-guarantee for 24-25, which is just patently absurd when we think it out loud. So you end up with Collins and Markkanen going into free agency in the same year, which if you have a team worth fucking around with after the 24-25 season, you are allowed under the rules to pay them, and it's whether you want to do so, and whether it's better to instead acquire young talent and kind of build around it. It's very similar to the NFL quarterback situation, where if you have a stellar quarterback on a rookie deal, you are allowed to spend those dozens of millions of dollars on other positions to build your roster around him. We've seen that with Kansas City's first Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes. We've seen that with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. We've seen that with Josh Allen before his extension in Buffalo. I'm making this comparison if only to say, like, there's only so many max players you can have at the same time. It's different from what Golden State has, where Golden State has all these guys who have been, they drafted these guys and they gave them extensions, and they're willing to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in luxury tax money because that team, when Steph Curry was making, I think it was like $11 million, won a title. And they were able to say, like, look, it doesn't matter how much we're paying these guys. So trading for Collins is not about the player and what he can provide. It's about what are you building around. With Markkanen making as much money as he is and John Collins making as much money as he is, you're not winning a title next year either, guys. So 2 years from now, I don't know what happens 2 years from now, but 3 years from now, both those guys are free agents, and both those guys are making $45 million if Collins pans out too, right? And if Collins doesn't pan out, then you have a $25 million anchor on your fucking team. So I have taking a bathroom break has given me added clarity on the John Collins trade. Most of all, I want to see John Collins in a functional system. I do like the idea of putting him in Indiana, which Indiana, surprisingly, they have an all-star in Tyrese Halliburton, and they seem to be on a similar track as Utah. But even more stunningly, Indiana has an even more cleaner cap sheet than Utah going forward, and they can afford taking the sort of like John Collins experiment playing alongside the recently extended Miles Turner, whose extension goes down, whose recently signed extension, his salary will go down over the years. So my main ethos is I love watching good players continue to be good players and being put in good opportunities. I think that Utah is a great opportunity for John Collins, who is from Utah, but the salary becomes, it's not an issue this year, it's not an issue next year. The salary issue becomes more prevalent a couple years from now. So Sharp mentions that the thing I would worry about is the Markkanen and Collins overlap too much. Threes are so far hard to find anyway. Maybe you couldn't do better anyways. We've seen the theory of the case with Markkanen at the three. I think with how modern NBA offenses and defenses are going, you're going to end up with several playoff opponents where you can put Markkanen on Wesley Matthews, right? Like a Wesley Matthews type, where they are not dynamic players. And as much as we hem and haw about weak players on defense being exploited, Markkanen's also not like total shit defensively, right? Like, he's not Trae Young. He's not Kelly Olynyk. He blocks a shot here and there. He's long. He's athletic. He gives a shit. He's a good thinker. So I have confidence in putting Lauri Markkanen in bad situations. Whereas if you have Trae Young in a bad situation, if you have Julius Randle in a bad situation, if you have Kelly Olynyk in a bad situation, just to continue the thread of these kind of guys, like, you can be in a really bad spot. Whereas you can be confident that Markkanen, just having him on the floor guarding a player that he shouldn't be guarding off of a switch or off of a weird zone situation or off of a bad fast break opportunity where he's guarding a player that he shouldn't, where the mismatch is prevalent, I just don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with Lowry, Markkanen guarding those guys. He really does give a shit. So when Sharp mentions that Markkanen, Collins, Kessler, you put that as a starting lineup, fuck yeah, man. Give me that. Collins averaged 1.5 blocks per game recently. And I know that season when he averaged 1.5 blocks came a lot with John Collins playing center. Okay, like give me a bench lineup where John Collins is playing center alongside Lowry Markkanen for a spell, right? That's your small ball lineup. Like that's cool. That's really cool. And so I do like the idea of trading for John Collins as a player. I think the salary situation gets really weird really fast. I said this a month ago, and I got some pushback for this. Walker Kessler being good can be a problem for the salary structure of the Jazz, but that's more of like a 5 years from now problem. Because like if Walker Kessler improves the way we're expecting him to improve, and to be this like fringe all-star candidate, right? Like that's a $30 million player. Do you want to pay Walker Kessler $30 million? I don't know. But that's obviously like a future problem, right? And so you're tasked with a very difficult situation of like, how do you improve this team now? And that's why I don't think it's going to happen this trade deadline. I don't even think it's going to happen this summer. But I do think by we get to next trade deadline, Utah's going to look at their salary structure and they're going to go to Ryan Smith and his billions and say, look, man, Markkanen's going to get paid. Kessler's going to get paid. Hopefully, ideally, Agbaji's going to get paid. We need to trade these first-round picks for players that we can retain via bird rights and actually build a roster that we can retain and win titles with. That's going to be the curious spot, and that's when we're going to see if Ryan Smith is what he's made of. The Derek Favors salary dump does not leave me optimistic, but Qualtrics as a business is like super important and super great. And Ryan Smith is in the rare position across NBA owners where I think Ryan Smith is willing to operate the Jazz at a loss, right? Like not like a several $1 million loss, but Ryan Smith loves the Jazz. Like he gets millions of dollars of personal value watching the Jazz win basketball games. So I do think we're in a unique position where we have a rich owner who isn't quite the Steve Ballmer lever, but he is a guy who can spend a few dollars on things. Obviously, the new TV deal is really helpful because that money goes to his pocket as well. So, Dan, I know you're kind of on part-timer here, but if you ever want to mention any corollary to what I said about like the salary structure going forward, I'd love to hear you say anything. Otherwise, Sharp's going to talk about Qualtrics, and Valens has something to do about let's worry about Walker Kessler's future salary at a later date. Let's do what's best for the team now. I'm only mentioning Kessler's salary because you look forward to these things, right? Like if the Jazz are on this plan that Tony Jones has very emphatically and accurately said that the Jazz don't give a shit about this year. They don't give a shit about next year even. Like this team is not about this year or next year. And Kessler is a late first-round pick. His salary is very low for 4 years going on down the road. But you do have to look at, okay, so if Markkanen gets a max contract 3 years from now, what are you really building around? I think we do have to wait for the TV deal to really worry about that too much, so you're probably right. Dan, am I being too general manager about this?
No, it's funny because so I had a longish drive today. I'm filling in for a team member, and that requires me to go kind of out of my way and make stops at a second location, and then I was heading to my real office, and so I had like a half hour in the car where I'm just like listening to podcasts and doing my regular thing, and I'm thinking about the Walker Kessler stuff, and I'm not going to say I had this exact line of thinking, but I just remember thinking like, man, the knowledge of how the whole Rudy Gobert thing played out, and I say this coming from the viewpoint of someone who thinks that the Rudy Gobert Walker Kessler comparisons are totally overdone, and we probably just need to, for the most part, cool it with that. But like, knowing what we know now about how great Rudy was and is, and yet how it still hampered the Jazz's ability to have him on their cap sheet for $40 million, $45 million, like, that's going to make that extension negotiation with Walker Kessler, if he continues to, on an upward trajectory for a 4-year rookie deal, that's going to make that an awkward conversation, right? Because to your point, I'm like, we'll see what he looks like in 4 years, but let's pretend that he just keeps playing at this kind of level and getting a little better around the fringes each year, and he's sort of like a like I've heard you use the Zubac comparison, someone who's like good enough to start, usually starts, doesn't always finish games because sometimes they want to play small, which if the Jazz get a John Collins type player, that's probably part of the plan, is to have some flexibility and not always close games the same way. Like, if that's what he is for 4 years, and he keeps getting like marginally better on the foundation that he's built through these first 50 games, then like, yeah, he's entitled to ask for more than like a Derek Favors extension adjusted for inflation. You know what I mean? And yet, like, doing that is, as we know, and like Rudy Gobert was a multi-year All-NBA player. He was a top 15 player, and we know that paying him, as good as he was, paying him made things difficult. So it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, and the benefit to having a player at Ivica Zubac's level is he's a valuable player you want on your roster. You're going to start him. He's good at rebounding. He's good at defense. And the theory of the case with a guy like Ivica Zubac is you don't have to play him, right? Like, you in current salary structure terms, you can play him $20 million a year, right? But like, if he's not going to score more than 10 points a game, it's like you get to the end of the game and say, hey, the team we're playing is not playing Joel Embiid to close the game. We don't have to play him. Like, and Sharp, to use your point with as a Sixers fan with Embiid completely warps what the other team has to do. And Rudy Gobert never impacted that offensively. And Steve Jones is, I think, the preeminent film expert on Rudy Gobert at this point, where it's not about like, oh, he's not the film expert on what Rudy Gobert can and can't do. He is the expert on, here's what teams playing Rudy do and don't care about. And we've seen for 3 years now that if you're playing a player like Rudy Gobert, like Ivica Zubac, that you just do not care what that player does to you you don't care about what that player does to you offensively in exchange for how you can neutralize his defensive benefit, right? Like, we've seen why Rudy Gobert is just the best defensive player in the league, but if on the other end of the court you can say, like, I will guard you with literally Reggie Jackson, right? And if you put Reggie Jackson on Joel Embiid, that's the quickest way to Joel Embiid getting 75 points. And so Walker Kessler raises an interesting situation where his skill set is identical to Rudy Gobert. Now, he shot, 22% from three at Auburn. So Walker Kessler has some sort of like real touch, and I do think that like 4 years from now you might actually be able to see who's a good comp for him if he has just like a little bit better offense, right? He's not going to be awkward offensively, but I think as a team, even if you look at peak Walker Kessler defensively, you want to be able to look at Kessler and say, like, sorry, buddy, you're not closing this game tonight. And that can be really hard if you're paying him $49 million a year. So that's where I come out on Kessler. Dan, what do you think?
No, I think you're right. And again, all of this is very much contingent upon what happens to him as a player, what happens to the Jazz as a team. So, that's that's where I hear a little bit of people saying, like, let's just enjoy 4 years and not stress about it. But I literally was driving down I-15 today, having this conversation with myself, going like, man, if he's like, you know, and I talked about this in the John Collins centric Who Says No episode, where I was like, you know, there's a scenario where he's Zubats, where he's a guy who like plays a lot of minutes, has a big role, but you know, on a given night, you're like, oh, we're gonna play small more, so you're gonna play less, and on a given night, we're gonna need you to play a bunch and whatever. Or there's also a scenario where he gets good enough and keeps developing enough to where he's a player that eventually you're just gonna have him playing 32 minutes a game into perpetuity. And I brought it up in the Collins context because I think that's why the Jazz like Collins. I think Collins and Markkanen is a forward duo that, because of their skill sets, could kind of work in either environment. Like you could play them, like that 3-man front court works in either of those Walker Kessler outcomes. But yeah, it's the 32 minute a night, you know, he's too good to take off the floor scenario that you start to go like, oh man, what's the number where you're recognizing his value and rewarding all the things he does for your basketball team, but not making it impossible to, you know, keep a contending core together, because it's just hard when you're doing, you know, $50 million at that position. It just is. And I think I'm on record as one of the preeminent Rudy Gobert lovers on planet Earth. And even I can recognize that part of the reason the Jazz are rebuilding right now is because that dollar figure for Gobert just over time became prohibitive, and there was, you know, no way out of their sort of competitive dead end with that number sitting on their cap sheet. So it's worth thinking about. Let's see where he winds up as a player in 4 years before we lose sleep. But you know, I guarantee you this conversation is probably happening inside the front office, just like there's conversations about what do we do with Colin Sexton in 2 years when he's extension eligible, if he really pans out. And just like there's conversations about, you know, the different ways that Ochai Abaji's future, like that's their job to do this. So I don't think it's silly, but you know, I will grant that it might be early.
So Dan, thank you for the umpteenth time for chiming in tonight for bathroom breaks and otherwise. It's great to have a guy to sound off on. I am the loudest beater of the drum that when the going got tough against Dallas, against Los Angeles, the Clippers, that is, that the answer to Utah's woes was, fuck it, put Rudy on Luka. Like, fuck it. We got no other answers. And Dallas had figured out how to exploit Rudy not guarding the ball. So my natural response to that, as just the casual fan that I am, is to say, okay, make them make a different decision, right? And if Luka torches Rudy for a quarter, then you lose by 40. I'd rather lose by 40 than lose by 10, right? If you're losing the thread of the series. So I don't think that a player of Rudy Gobert's, I'm only mentioning this to say, I don't think a player of Rudy Gobert's ilk is dead from the NBA. So when we're gifted, straight up fucking gifted, a Walker Kessler, I don't think it's like, oh shit, we got a Rudy situation on our hands, right? Where he's going to make $45, $50, $55 million a year as we go into the new cap structure and be hamstrung and not be able to acquire a real ball handler who can make a difference, or a Donovan Mitchell type, right? Like if we're pairing Markkanen and Kessler, making a combined $100 million a year that we don't have the cap space to do anything else. I'm not totally scared of that, because I do think that there is a real 8-figure a year role for a guy like Walker Kessler. It's more of the timing of everything. And I would like Walker Kessler to get that extension when he's eligible after Utah has put its other pieces ostensibly together. Whether that be Colin Sexton, whether that be somebody else that we trade all these first round picks for. That's what I'm mainly concerned about. I saw you're ready to respond, Dan. So, what do you think of that?
What I was going to say is just I think that's partially where all these extra picks come into because, because they have other teams' picks all the way to 2029, they can kind of get what they think is their next core together, but still sort of keep taking shots and potentially taking like early lottery shots, depending on what happens with Minnesota, what happens with Cleveland. So I think that's part of the answer and part of how they've created some fun. Like if we had Danny or Justin here and we gave them truth serum, I think that's part of how they would answer that is like, we're not done building the team in 2026 because we still have all these other shots. But I agree with you that like there is a timing thing of like there's going to be a point in the life cycle of this thing when you have flexibility, and there's going to be a point in that life cycle when you don't anymore. And that's why it's important to figure out like what each of these guys is in that title contending construct, and knowing that like, look, we're like not like forget the cap height. Like next year, we're in an environment where the MLE is going to be like 12 million next year. Like this summer, guys are going to make 12 million on the mid-level exception, the non-tax mid-level.
That is legitimately life-changing money, and that's not what the mid-level exception was meant to be. The mid-level exception was meant to be like, do you want a small deal? Do you want a little deal to like extend your career a little bit? The mid-level exception right now is legitimately for a player who has played 5 or 6 years in the NBA, who kind of maybe has a role or maybe doesn't. They can get $50 million.
Yeah. And which then, by the way, means that like, for the last few years, like 15 to 20 million has kind of been the low end starter money. But if you can get 12, if any mid-level guy can get 12 million, then now you're talking about like low end. And when I say starter money, I mean, obviously other than guys who are on a rookie deal, because those guys' salary is artificially limited. Like now you're going to be in a situation where like your Maxi Klebas, like that level of sort of non-star starter is going to be like 20 million and up. And like, so part of it is just that like everybody needs to change their math and their visceral reaction to hearing numbers because, like I made the joke about Derek Favors adjusted for inflation. Like Derek Favors' rookie contract extension, if I remember right, was like 4 years, 50 million, 4 years, 48 million, something like that. But that was when the cap was 65 or something. So, extrapolate that out. And when you're dealing with Walker Kessler, the salary cap's probably going to be close to 200, if not over 200, which means his 4-year extension might be like 150, and that is equivalent to what Derek Favors signed. And we all just have to like figure that out at some point in the next 4 years so that we stop going like, holy crap, 50 million. Like, do you remember when Mike Conley signed a 4-year 150 or a 5-year $150 million deal?
Yeah, there was the richest extension in NBA history.
Right. And now that's kind of just like, oh, okay, like in a couple of years that's what non-star starters are going to get.
Yeah.
Or close to it.
Yeah, and then you start looking at like when people say that Utah has a plan, they mention it in more of the it's a 3, 4, 5, 6 year plan. It's easy to discount what the 6th year looks like. Like, yeah, accounting for future value. Like, I'm not gonna watch fucking 5 years of Jazz basketball waiting for a contender. But it does allow credence to the idea of what level of aggression might seem appropriate now versus later. I think where Utah fans are just a little bit like sketched out over the idea of Walker Kessler being like the new Rudy Gobert. And to that end, like I hate thinking about guys like assets, right? Like they're just fucking numbers on a spreadsheet because they're real players, and I care about like the wives and girlfriends part of this, right? Like just like the social atmosphere that these guys have. Like Walker Kessler went out to dinner with Micah Potter, who's on a two-way with his wife, and Michaela Skinner, who we all know as the Olympic silver medalist in gymnastics, who's married, by the way. wasn't dating Walker Kessler or anything like that, but it's just like it's cool to see like that sort of like team building environment, right? Where we're getting to that point, and all the Jazz wives went on a ski trip, 2 days ago, and like there's a real cool thing to having the team build together and be a family together. And I think that is what Utah fans actually more than other fans care about more. And I'm not from Salt Lake City. I am not a Mormon, as I sit here drinking several beers. But even I have an appreciation for the small market, good family values team where it's like, these guys just like fucking like each other, right? And it makes me thrilled to have a guy like Jordan Clarkson who loves Utah. It makes me thrilled to have a guy like Mike Conley who loves Utah, right? And build this team the way they have. It makes me thrilled to have a guy like Donovan Mitchell call out the hypocrisy of Utah and really poke Utah in the ways that they need to be poked. This is exactly what you intended, what anybody intended with this conversation, but the idea of kind of growing a team together does matter to me as a fan, and I think it matters to a lot of people as a fan, where I can be very dense in talking about the salary and the percentage of the salary cap of how much these guys are worth and how you build a team around these guys and bleep blorp. How much fucking fun has Walker Kessler been this year? And how much fucking fun would it be to have Walker Kessler being on an NBA Finals team with Lowry Markkanen? Like that means more to me than like let's pretend the Clippers have a real fan base for a second, right? The way the Clippers have built their team feels fake. It feels like not relevant, right? Like the most relevant part of their team is Terrence Mann. Like, did they even draft Terrence Mann? I'm pretty sure they did. I'm a big San Francisco 49ers fan, right? And like I get tears in my eyes thinking about like what it would mean if like Brock fucking Purdy won the Super Bowl. Like holy shit. And then you get the title teams together with Patrick Mahomes. That's a quarterback you drafted. Jalen Hurts. That's a quarterback you drafted. And a title is a title, and Utah does not know what a title feels like, and I'm sure we will be happy with an NBA championship either way. But there's the poeticism of it is really cool. Sharp mentions 100% need to have something you can get yourself to connect with the players. Sharp, I should mention, I lived in Philly for 3 years. This diploma at the top of my screen here, that's a Penn Law diploma. I adore Philadelphia. I was in Philadelphia for all 3 years of the process. I made a lot of money on the Sixers over 1 year. I love the Sixers. They were my Eastern Conference team, and then the Ben Simmons thing happened, and then they weren't my Eastern Conference team, but now that they don't have Ben Simmons, I love the Sixers. It's like a tie between the Sixers and the Heat. But I love Philadelphia. I love the Sixers. I love the Eagles, despite everything. And Joel Embiid being on the Sixers is like an entire theory of what I'm talking about. Is like you go through all that shit for Joel Embiid, right? And I live in Denver now, right? So I love the Sixers and I love the Nuggets. And I'm sitting here as like this Nuggets Sixers weird like pseudo fan, like Jokic versus Embiid, and the way you get Jokic as a second round pick versus Embiid as like the star player that you're tanking for. There's an entire theory to that is, I understand why Nuggets fans love Jokic and why Sixers fans love Embiid, but when you're going for a title, there's something that just means more if these guys mean something, right? And I would love for a guy like Walker Kessler, who's been just a top 2 charismatic guy behind Jordan Clarkson for the Jazz ever since he got here. And that matters. And so, Dan, I know you like it when I bring it back to the theory of the fan. That is part of what I care about when we talk about the Jazz being this quality of a team. But what players do we have on this team as we go forward? Do we trade Walker Kessler in while he's on his rookie deal for a star player? That's gonna sting a little bit. That really is gonna sting. Ask the Clippers how they feel about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, right? Now the Thunder ain't doing shit this year, right? They're kind of on their way with Chet Holmgren, and Jalen Williams looks like a star, but and maybe not a star, but Jalen Williams is certainly on his way to being really great. I think Jalen Williams will be a star, frankly, and it really does matter when you can actually really love the guys who are going for that title. And so Jazz fans are slowly getting on board with Markkanen, and Walker Kessler introduces an interesting element where we love the guy, but does he have the same limited skill set that makes it hard to build a team around? We shall see. Friends, I'll keep going if you guys want me to. You all on the broadcast have probably noted I switched to Coors Light, which is a rarity for me. It's I have a superstition that I always have to keep a light beer in the back corner of the fridge in case we go long. So I've had a 12% bourbon barrel aged chocolate cinnamon and Chili's Imperial Stout, and I've went over to the Nitro Coffee Pumpkin Imperial Ale, and now we're drinking a Coors Light to have fun with y'all today. So if you're on Twitter Spaces, happy to take your questions and comments. And if you're on YouTube, I will always take your comments as we have. Sharp, what is your Philly connection? I'm curious to hear what your Philly connection is, and if you're a Philly guy or you just like the Sixers. And you mentioned Korkmaz. I mean, he's still around. Korkmaz is a good. He's Turkish, right? Or am I confusing him with Ersan Ilyasova? No, he's Turkish too. Yeah. So the Sixers are a fun team. We got Joel Embiid is an interesting case just because he is that dominant defensive player, but he has so much offensive acumen that it really just isn't the same. Right, you have an MVP candidate versus a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. It really just inverts the theory of why you care about a 7-footer, and it's fun to cheer for Walker Kessler now, and I just don't know exactly when you get to his extension, where you're actually going to end up. Sharp says Ilyasova is from Crimea, but he plays for the Turkish national team, doesn't he? We're used to. Hey now, Ilyasova is as much of a jazz man as he is a Sixer, so. Sharp says he got in basketball. Ben's rookie year. He's from Harrisburg. Welcome in a couple new listeners. We got Chad. We got Justin, a.k.a. Bruno Stars. And we got the Utah Jazz Reddit account here on the Twitter Spaces. If you guys want to request to speak, this is an open forum. You guys can always request to speak and drop any sort of complaints or knowledge or trade deadline thoughts. Happy to hear it. And with that, I'll take a couple sips of this Coors Light here after a couple of the craft beers we've been drinking. And from there, I think we've been on the air for a couple hours now. This has been a really fun night with everybody. But if I will absolutely stay on the line if anyone wants to drop a few comments or request to speak. We've been talking about John Collins. We've been talking about trade deadline. Talked a lot about tonight's game, but that was a while ago, so that's yesterday's news at this point. Well, with that, I will summarize tonight's game real quickly and my thoughts about it. Jazz lose 115-108. The stats don't show it, but it was a really frustrating game on the defensive glass for Utah. They gave up plenty of offensive rebounds. The culprits of that were Kelly Olynyk and Malik Beasley, in my opinion. Kelly Olynyk will show that he had 4 offensive rebounds, but 3 of them came on one possession where he still did not score and still lost the basketball. And so Kelly Olynyk will show with 10 rebounds in 30 minutes tonight. I had a real problem with him tonight, so I probably should just take a break and stop criticizing him, but I had an issue. I had a bone to pick with him. Malik Beasley, not his best form tonight, 1 of 8 from 3 tonight. But Lauri Markkanen was also 3 of 11 from 3 tonight, and Markkanen goes 25 and 10. He was 6 of 7 from the free throw line, and I thought his defense was adequate, so I don't necessarily think Markkanen was a problem. Conley was great, except for the 5 turnovers, and the turnovers might have ended up being the difference today for Utah, considering that everybody else was relatively okay with the basketball except for Sexton. And Sexton himself was 12 points, 1 rebound, 0 assists, 3 turnovers, which gave way to 5 minutes of Nickeil Alexander-Walker. The second most important storyline tonight was Walker Kessler only having 18 minutes tonight, not for foul trouble, not for any particular reason. The Jazz were trying to keep a 5-out lineup with Olynyk and Markkanen at the forward spots, and Clarkson, Conley, and Ochai Agbaji closing the game tonight, and trying to exploit the weak Atlanta defense with a 5-out lineup, even though the Atlanta still kept Okongwu and or Clint Capella in the game. So interesting to only see Kessler playing 18 minutes today. He didn't have a great 18 minutes. He was minus 15 in those 18 minutes with a few fouls, but I do think that I felt like Atlanta's offense was playing very rickety against Kessler, and they were making good shots. And I also feel like Utah's offense, when Kessler wasn't on the floor, where you have that 5-out lineup, when Vanderbilt also wasn't on the floor, you want to have more of the driving kick, really stretch out Capella, stretch out Okongwu from that defense, and I don't think that was the offense they were operating at all. So that was kind of the quirky playmaking things I saw in the fourth quarter, but they did come back with a 6-point advantage in the fourth quarter. They lose 115-108 after being down 22 points at one point in the second quarter. Atlanta's on a road trip. They kicked the shit out of the Suns a couple nights ago, so this could be, it is what it is. Trade deadline coming up. We'll see what happens with Beasley. We'll see what happens with Vanderbilt. We saw John Collins, a rumored trade candidate for Utah, basically standing in the corner all night and shooting 1 of 7 from 3. Does not look like the dynamic player we're used to seeing from 2 years ago against the Jazz. So, Sharp asked how Sexton has been this year. Not the Cleveland year, let me put it that way. Defense is bad. Passing is bad. Good scorer. I think Cleveland caught lightning in a bottle for that 1 year. So I think this will call it for the Salt City Hoops live postcast and beer. SaltCityHoops.com. Check out my column that dropped today on your Friday afternoon about the trade likelihood for every Jazz player. And until then, we'll catch you Monday against the Mavericks. We'll see if Luka Doncic plays. And then Wednesday night, we get Rudy Gobert back in town again against the Jazz. And then Thursday is the trade deadline. So we'll see how these players continue on for the Jazz. This has been, my name is Mark. Great to see you. Great to have you. And we'll catch you Monday night. Good night.